Okay, hi. This is Tom and Jesse Talk Movies. I'm Jesse.
I'm Tom.
Today before I do that, I'm going to plug the email that we have, the contact us for anything, questions, concerns. That's programs@cshlibrary.org for anything that you might have to say. Today we're going to be talking about sequels, which is this is going to be a cool show to talk about. So
totally.
We both have maybe individual selections or a couple movies that we want to discuss.
Oh, absolutely.
But before we get into the actual individual selections, do you want to talk about what are the parameters? What do you think makes a good sequel or an interesting sequel?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I tend to be one of those people. I'm not into like sequels as much. I tend to like just a one-off.
Mm-hmm.
I like when a movie can just sum everything up by the end. Not I'm okay if it ends like a little open-ended. Make the audience think. That's cool. But I tend to not really be into sequels and and then like franchises. Like they would really have to wow me. So I'm already critical, but now I'm even more critical when they do a second one, because there have been movies that I absolutely love the first one, and then I see the sequel, and I'm like, well, that was unnecessary. There was no reason to do this movie. It was not at all interesting. But then there are, some examples of like, wow, I think I might like this second one better. Or the second movie, or even in the third movie, they expand upon what they presented us in the first film. We'll give some examples, but what I don't like about a sequel is when they try and outdo the first one, almost like they remake the first one. So it'll be like the same plot, just different actors and characters, and they're still doing the same thing. But it all depends on the story. Is this a story that can be expanded? Do we want to know more about this universe?
Mm-hmm.
Because every film sets up a universe, a world, and it's all about, did it suck you in or not? And is it worth to revisit it?
Absolutely.
So yeah.
I think that's a really fair point that you make. And one of the examples that I'm going to use is, so I happen to love the original Blade Runner.
Yes.
And then the Blade Runner sequel, Blade Runner 2049, which came out years and years later. Mm-hmm. Again, when you talk about building a certain environment or an atmosphere that you really want to revisit, I think even just aesthetically, it is one of like the neon lights and everything about the original Blade Runner. It's this living organic world. And I did have some issues with the sequel. Overall, I really liked it. But just to get a chance to revisit that, and the fact that there is so much time that spans in between the first two movies, for me, it felt like I was just stepping right back into that universe. And I think they did a terrific job in maintaining sort of the continuity of the world that they created in the first one. So like you said, there are certain movies where they feel like they're an extension of that first movie, rather than, nothing's worse than going into a movie for me, or a sequel, and the first 30 or so minutes are just about recapping the events and the characters, and it's like, it feels gimmicky. It's like kind of
it is. Is this a cash-in, or is this due to art? Like, is the director back? Is the writer back? Do they really say, hey, we have more to say?
Right.
And I mean, I can tell you there's several, like I love this one film called Insidious. Mm-hmm. And I love the first movie. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. I thought it really reinvented the haunted house genre.
I love Insidious.
It was well received by critics. But I thought the second film was awful. Mm-hmm. And, it's certainly a world I would have liked to revisit, but just the execution, I was like, this is nothing like the first movie. And the same thing with The Ring, where like Ring 2 is just interesting subject matter and characters, and they're back for the sequel, but just, again, the execution, it's just awful. But I think, we'll go into some sequels. You're going to start it off with one that I feel we both need to reintroduce to the world.
So this was cool, because when we were setting up this conversation, I think when we initially had our discussions on like sequels, I said, I want to pick something out that's kind of like been forgotten.
Yeah.
And maybe kind of unfairly forgotten. Mm-hmm. So my selection that I picked is Psycho 2, again, starring Anthony Perkins. And I'm really going to pull you into the conversation points here. I don't mean to put you on the spot, because I think you're the foremost authority on horror movies. So you know a lot about them, and you have really good opinions on them. But I think what's so interesting about Psycho 2 is the fact that, so the original Psycho came out in 1960, I want to
Correct.
say.
Mhm.
Alfred Hitchcock, one of the most, well, in the pantheon of horror movies, this is where I want to bring you in, because Psycho, to me, the original, feels like one of those movies that just transcends the horror genre, where it's just respected and kind of elevated to a level just for how great it is.
Right.
I mean, what do you think about Psycho in terms of...
I love Psycho. It's probably my favorite Hitchcock film because for me, when it comes to Hitchcock, I've only seen a few, and a lot of them I just found them to be kind of boring, and I wasn't really into. Like, I'm not into The Birds. I just, it's too silly. It's too corny. Even though it is played serious, I just am not into it. And it's not even because of like the effects. I can suspend my belief. I can be not critical about older effects. I just didn't think the acting was anything. It just wasn't an interesting plot. But I do love the first Psycho. I think it's a legit good movie.
Right.
And it's one of those movies that, like, regardless or not, if you're into horror, like, you've seen it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love it. And I think Anthony Perkins' character, Norman Bates, is so fascinating. And it's like, okay, if they're going to do a sequel, I mean, this is like, what, 20 plus years later?
22 years after.
Yes.
So very, very generally, I mean, the story is about the character Norman Bates, played by the incomparable Anthony Perkins, who he's the proprietor of a hotel. He owns a hotel. And he sort of has this very interesting complex where he, I guess I'm going to have to spoil the first one, where he kind of thinks he's his mother.
Right.
So
he's schizophrenic.
He's schizophrenic. Thank you. So he dresses up as his mother, and it's really one of those seminal twists in a movie, right? Too, because
especially for the time.
For the time, I mean, you just didn't expect something like that. And maybe you talk about, not only a seminal twist, but talk about this shower scene. Even if you haven't seen Psycho, I would argue that you've seen Janet Leigh's character in the shower, the knife kind of.
Yeah, that's like
So that's just one of those. I mean, it's an iconic movie, and it's not just an iconic horror movie; it's an iconic movie in general, I would think.
Yes.
So what makes Psycho 2 so interesting is the fact that they would even attempt to make a sequel to this movie.
Right, and I mean to cut you off, but like how many people have been like, Psycho 2, why would they do that?
Right.
Leave it alone or whatever. What could they possibly do? And that's a fair criticism. Right. But I always say, actually see the movie. Like, just trust me on this one. It's actually good.
Right.
Because how many times there have been iconic films in the 70s or 80s, and then like in the 90s or 2000s, they will then do a sequel, and you're like, why did that need to happen? Right. I love Psycho 2, and this is definitely one of those sequels, I would say, that is really underrated. Mm-hmm. Not many people have seen it, but yeah, I mean,
let's get into it a little bit, because I think what's so commendable, is how ambitious this movie is. Because again, when you get a slew of sequels, I mean, I think Friday the 13th sequels are fun. I think
those are cash grabs,
but they're cash grabs, and this movie was sort of so antithetical to that cash grab. In fact, to get into it, again, this is a movie that had taken 22 years to come out. The original came out in 60, like we said, and the sequel came out, I think it was 82.
I thought it was 83.
82 or 83. Okay, so the landscape of film had really changed at that point.
Yes.
And Anthony Perkins had absolutely zero intention of reprising his role as Norman Bates until he read the script. And when he read the script, he goes, boy, this is really different. And that's kind of what brought him into the fold. And this is really, it's kind of ingenious in the way that they make this movie. And I don't want to really try to give away too much of it. But you start off, and Norman Bates is just released from prison. And it's basically in real time. So he basically serves like a 20-plus year prison sentence when we meet him again. And he comes out. And right off the bat, you're kind of met with Janet Leigh's sister, who's played by Vera Miles. Lila Crane is the character's name.
She comes back.
She comes back, which is another. She reprises her role from the original one. And she comes out, and right from the get-go, you're like, obviously she's very, very upset about Norman Bates being released. Who wouldn't be?
Right. Why is he not in jail for life?
For the rest of his life. So very early on, as you're kind of reintroduced to the character of Norman Bates, you're just waiting. There's this sort of insidious tension where you're like, when is he going to kill again?
Right.
Where are the victims?
Is he reformed?
Is he reformed? And what you kind of see is that he is a bit of a rehabilitated character, which is so interesting. So right off the bat, it's not like, this is this diabolical character that's just waiting to kill again. Right. As the circumstances and the situations unfold, you start to see that he's actually kind of goaded into insanity again. And there's an introduction of a slew of really interesting characters that sort of work on him to kind of push him over the edge a little bit. But when you start the movie off, he's getting a job as a fry cook in a restaurant, and he really is making strides to rehabilitate his image. Mm-hmm. I thought that's insanely smart. You didn't go the cash grab route. You didn't go, exactly, I'm out of prison, let me restart my killing spree. So that's one thing that I really like.
And that's why, exactly, and I felt that Psycho too. It's more of a character story. It's, I would say it's more of a drama. Mm-hmm. Of course there is, suspense, no doubt, but it is focused on the character of Norman. Here he is released back into the wild. How is he going to be? And, for the most part, you're really on his side, which you would never find yourself saying. So that's what I think makes the film smart. It was handled really well by the filmmakers. And, how Norman, he runs into a younger woman who works at the diner mm-hmm. in town, and they establish a friendship. And I just found them to be really interesting characters, being like, wow, you know what? I've kind of missed Norman Bates. I think this is a cool direction they took him in. So I was just really impressed. And this is one of those forgotten sequels. People are like, wait, they did a sequel to Psycho? They actually did 4 films, which is crazy. And some of the later ones are not good. Mm-hmm. If you were a big fan of Psycho, I really would say check out 2 because, obviously it's not going for Hitchcockian type stuff, but for the character development alone, it was interesting.
Right. And I think, again, what's really admirable about it is that it really serves to kind of give itself an own identity, because it could have tried to be Psycho again. I mean, they could have done the same thing, put Norman Bates in a hotel again, and from the get-go, he's starting to kill people. That's really totally the opposite of it is. In fact, the first murder really doesn't come on until, it's 30, 40 minutes into the film.
While, yeah, exactly.
I mean, and to the point that you made, so much of it is built on character development.
Yes,
and you have, again, it's Norman Bates revisiting this world that he hasn't lived in, and Anthony Perkins is revisiting.
And
this
the
world.
80s are so different from the 60s.
The 80s are so different from the 60s, but yet there's still this stigma. Everybody knows who Norman Bates is, obviously. I mean, he's this local murderer that's obviously has a lot of press and publicity. And so it's about him trying to fit back into society. And the character played by Meg Tilly is kind of one of the only people who kind of can see the good in him or see that he's trying to reform.
Exactly.
Very quickly to the point that you made about this really marked shift in time periods. So in 1960s, and I think one of the great things about Hitchcock is about his ability to show you a lot without actually showing it. What I mean by that, again, is the iconic shower sequence where Janet Leigh's character is getting stabbed.
Yes.
Obviously, because of censorship reasons and what was allowed in the 1960s, you had to be really creative and artful in the ways that you kind of showed brutality. And if you kind of rewatch that scene, well, you'll see that there's really not a lot of the knife going into her, and there are limitations as to what you could show.
All the cuts, no pun intended, are really well done.
I enjoy that pun. But now you get to the 1980s, right? So this is the era of Friday the 13th. And this is 1979, Halloween came out, right?
Yeah, the 80s are known for forget horror, like just 1980s movies were known as being really just graphic and all about like the popcorn fun. You know, it was the horror and sci-fi was big in the 80s. 70s was more like experimental, and then 80s was like, the era of like sequels. So like Halloween, the birth of Jason from the Friday the 13th films. Yes, and those films, as much as I love them, those are total cash grabs because we never expand upon the the characters.
But now what's kind of cool and interesting about this is that it's like a metamorphosis, right? It's like in the 1960s, you couldn't show all that much brutality. You get some pretty graphic scenes in the sequel to Psycho 2, certain murders and everything. So that's really you have to have a stomach for it. But I mean, there's an evolution, but it doesn't feel tacky. I mean, it just sort of serves to heighten, I guess, the villainy of certain characters. I mean, some of these sequences are pretty gruesome deaths.
Definitely.
So it's interesting to see the shift from the 1960s and the way it adapted into the 90s.
Totally.
Again, it's not a cash grab. You could have remade Psycho for what it was.
Right.
You didn't, and I appreciate that. By the way, when I was doing a little research, I actually found out. Now, maybe Quentin Tarantino isn't a very big Hitchcock fan. He happens to love Psycho 2. He says it's better than the predecessor, which is a little bit bold.
That's a bold statement.
He also said Gus Van Sant's remake was better than Hitchcock's version,
That's crazy.
I
like the Psycho. I mean, it's an awful film.
Vince Vaughn. There was another shot.
I thought Vince Vaughn was good. Yeah.
Remake. What year did that come out? Was it
98? That film, I would love to do an episode on just that film because from a filmmaking standpoint, it's all over the place.
Yes.
So.
And it was supposed to be a shot-for-shot remake anyway, not to diverge too far from the path. But this is a sequel that I'm passionate about. I wanted to bring attention to. I know you kind of feel similarly about it.
Yes, I do. Absolutely.
It's not fair when you stick a number 2 at the end of it and you just expect that, this is going to be a crash.
I really think it's a good movie.
Right.
Yeah.
So I love Psycho 2.
Great. Psycho 2, definitely. It's streaming on that new NBC app.
Yes,
Peacock.
Peacock. So I actually, all I did was sign up for it. I didn't put any credit card information down or anything, name and password, and I was just able to stream it with a few ads in the middle.
Or you could get it from the library.
Get it from the library.
So I'm going to talk about a couple films, but first up, I'm going to talk about Godfather Part II, and one of the most iconic sequels of all time. This was a first-time watch for me. I only recently watched The Godfather like a month or two ago for the first time, and you haven't.
I haven't seen it, so.
But
if you want to kick me out,
I figure I'm like, let me watch The Godfather. It was like right before Christmas. I was like, all right. And I really enjoyed The Godfather. I really did. I could see why it's this iconic movie. I mean, it's long. There are parts that are slow, but I mean, the performance of Marlon Brando is amazing. So naturally you're like, okay, you got there's 3 of them. Most people say Part 3 is horrible. I've not watched it yet. And a lot of people say, oh, Part 2 is one of the best sequels of all time. Some people like it better than the first film. I'm not going to talk too much about it because honestly, I was not one of those people that fell in love with the movie. I think it's fine, but I think it's a little overhyped personally. The film there's really 2 plots going on. I mean, I'm not going to spoil the end of the first movie because you haven't seen it. But
I probably should see it one of these days.
But we follow Robert De Niro is playing a younger. Why am I drawing a blank on the name? But a younger version of the character played by Marlon Brando, Vito Corleone. So we have Robert De Niro playing him probably in his 30s, 40s, whereas, when we see The Godfather, he's much older, 70s and stuff. So we see, the rise of Vito, and it starts out when he's 9 years old in Italy, in Corleone, Italy, which I was like, wait, isn't that his last name? And then it was interesting to see where he came from. And then he comes through Ellis Island to America. And how he gets his name is actually just kind of cool. I thought that was cool. It's just his name is Vito, and they couldn't pronounce his last name. So they're like, oh, where are you from? Corleone, Italy. Okay, great. That's your last name. So oh, okay, that was kind of cool. But then it jumps to Al Pacino playing Michael, who is the son of Vito, who kind of takes over the business. That happens in the first movie, and he kind of takes over. And so the movie is jumping back and forth. I honestly found the stuff with Robert De Niro way more interesting than Al Pacino. Okay. Michael is married to Diane Keaton's character, And I love Diane Keaton in general, but like in the movie, she's great, but she's so out of place where like she's like this innocent, almost like Irish girl, like does not at all fit in with the Italian family. So she's out of place, but rightfully so. I mean, it makes sense with the plot. Robert Duvall is back, and and the sister. I wasn't as interested in the stuff with Michael, following him, continuing the business. It just didn't do a lot for me. Okay. And it's like a 3-hour movie, but at the first hour, I'm just like, this is so boring. Again, liking the stuff with De Niro, but not so much Al Pacino. Okay. Business dealings and so forth. The first movie I felt was so much more, I guess I would say, jaw-dropping, where it's like, there's like, oh my God, I can't believe that character died. I'm like, oh wait, I don't trust these guys. It just was more interesting to me. Okay. And so the second movie, people love it, and I'm sure people, most people will disagree with me. It felt a little lifeless at times. So, and that's a bold statement.
If you're making a 3-hour movie, you better have quite a bit of life.
Yeah, and Coppola came back. He did this, he wrote it. So he's back. But honestly, I wasn't interested enough to even see the third film. I have heard pretty bad. I've heard it's awful, but I got to be honest, I'm not really interested in the third film. But back to sequels in general, there are other sequels that I think are excellent and well-deserved. We'll talk about the Terminator films. T2, Judgment Day, is again also an iconic sequel, and a lot of people will say, I like 2 better than 1.
I think I fit into that camp, honestly.
I love them both. I mean, there are times I'm like, no, I like 1 better. And then I'll be watching 2, I'm like, wait, this is really cool. And that is just the definition of what a sequel should be. Mm-hmm. Because the first film sets up this world of, we have young Linda Hamilton, someone comes back from the future, which, I mean, that was explored a lot in the 70s and 80s. Right. Coming back from the future saying, hey, you're going to give birth to somebody, to a son, and he is going to grow up and lead a resistance against
an army of machines.
Like, technology is going to become so advanced that it's going to wipe out humanity, because we keep, making technology so smart. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that to me is a fascinating concept. Right. And that's the first movie. And, the movie ends, you're like, okay, wow, that was really cool. But what a fascinating concept. So where could we go with this idea? And now, flash forward, we have Linda Hamilton now has a son who is played by Edward Furlong, who's 11 or 12?
He's very young.
Yeah, young teen. 13. I mean, maybe 12 or 13. Mm-hmm. And his name is John, and he's going to grow up and lead this resistance.
John
Connor. And it's just it's fascinating how much care went into the sequel.
Right. Because
now it's okay, now we're preparing for the world to end, Judgment Day. And it's one of those movies where it's the characters, Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton, is one of my favorite characters ever in a film. Mm. And her son, they got really good actors. Arnold Schwarzenegger's back. And it's just, where they go, and they're like, okay, we're going to try and stop this now. In the first one, we just survived one robot trying to come and kill us. Now we're going to try and stop the guy who invented the technology that's going to lead to this. And you're like, whoa, that's really cool. that's pretty deep.
And I think one of the coolest, because I love Terminator 2, and I think I might fall into the camp, like I said, where I love Terminator 2 more so. And it's just the fact that you have this iconic, indomitable killing machine in Arnold Schwarzenegger. He can't be stopped at all in the first one. And then within the first 15 minutes of T2, you're setting Arnold up to be the good guy.
Right.
And who's, helping John Connor establish the resistance. That, mind blown right there. I mean, you take a character like Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator and you actually make him the good guy. It's someone that you rooted. It's kind of in a similar vein what happened to Psycho.
Yeah,
right.
I see that. Yeah,
you turn someone bad, you kind of turn him good a little bit.
It's an action movie, but we also get into our characters, which is rare.
Right.
But
and it's bold decision making. Because again, you could have gone for the cash cow. You could have made Arnold the bad guy again. Mm-hmm. Really easy to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but it did something different.
And it was a huge hit. Just also other sequels I really love Home Alone 2.
Okay.
I really do like
It's been
it.
a while since
Around the past 2 Christmases I actually watched 1 and 2 back to back, and I like the first film a lot, but I always liked Home Alone 2 more because there's actually more heart in it. I know it's a kids movie, it's supposed to be fun, but like what I liked with 2, and this is what a sequel should do, is you gotta almost like up the ante a bit. You gotta outdo the first film, but don't like remake it. So it's got to be like, okay, how can we expand upon this? It's not really a deep story. The same thing happens again. So you're like, oh, this time his parents just lost him while going on vacation to the city instead of leaving him at home. Okay, let's see how that is. But I actually think it's really cool because putting Kevin McAllister in Manhattan is fascinating.
Right.
Because I loved all the characters that we were introduced to. Like he goes to this store called Duncan's Toy Chest, which is a total, it's meant to be FAO Schwartz, right? And we meet this guy, and Kevin and him establish a little bit of a connection, and then like the bandits being back, like okay, that's kind of, a little silly, but like, I love like we have the bird lady in it, and I just really liked it. Like there is a message in there. Like I know it's Home Alone, you can't go like how deep can we get, but it is a nice movie where like you do understand what like family means and everything, and I just really enjoyed it. I thought I like Home Alone 2 much better than the first film. I think putting it Manhattan really plays a character here, and I'm such a fan of when like setting it becomes a character. I mean, New York City, we're running down by like the seaports, and then we're going we're going through these old like brownstones, and I just thought it was
it's
really
a
cool.
perfect setting for someone to get lost in.
Exactly. And then I do want to mention, before we go, I want to talk about another iconic franchise, Jurassic Park.
Okay.
Now that's an example of, I want to expand upon this world, but I didn't like the second movie. Most people kind of feel that way, but what do you think of Jurassic Park 2?
Been too long for me to.
This was, I remember, I was 8 years old when it came out. I saw it in the theater twice. I had like all the action figures, and that's a series that is still going on. I mean, they kind of rebooted it, and I hate that word, but like, Jurassic Park came out in 1993, one of the most iconic films of all time. Steven Spielberg, excellent cast, and just it all starts with the concept. And I know every week I just harp on script and ideas, and that to me is where films come to life, like, because the average moviegoer is not going to go, wow, look at that lighting, look what they did there, or like, wow, that cinematography. I mean, while that stuff is all incredibly important to an idea, the audience will walk away, oh, I really liked the scene where the dinosaur came in here, and then, like, that is all story stuff. And so to me, Spielberg introduced us to an excellent idea of, hey, dinosaurs, right? Okay, well, now we're going to bring them back to life, but like actual dinosaurs instead of like animatronics, with DNA and science. And they explain that. And I'm not a scientist at all. So me watching that, I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. Sure. I'm sure, biologists would watch that and be like, yeah, that's impossible. But whatever. What an idea of, we have this theme park. We're not only are we bringing dinosaurs to life, it's also going to be a theme park where the public can come and view. That's kind of cool. We know something's going to go wrong, but the first film, only like the CEOs and the bigwigs and some doctors go there. The park didn't even open yet, and it's insane. So the second film rolls around. It's like, okay, it's going to take place on a different island now. Ian Malcolm, played by Jeff Goldblum, comes back with Julianne Moore, who's one of my favorite.
Love Julianne Moore.
Love her. And, we're going to bring characters back, and now it's going to take place on a different island. It's like, okay, it was cool. But Jurassic Park 2, also known as The Lost World, is more focused on the action and less, kind of the, like what they did in the first film was smart. This one is, there are smart moments, I like Jeff Goldblum. Why do I keep forgetting his name? He's smart. He's kind of like what the audience says. Like, just because you could doesn't mean you should. And that's kind of explored in the second film. And then it just wasn't as interesting. I thought some of the characters weren't as interesting. Okay. So that's a Jurassic Park 2 is an excellent idea of, we've established this awesome universe that I wanted to explore. And then we go do that in the second film. And it's like, okay, I appreciated you brought this dinosaur in and like, okay, this was cool. And then by the third film, which is literally just straight up action adventure film, it's like, hey, we're just going to the island to rescue some people.
Okay.
And then that was the third film. And then they kept going with this franchise and they rebooted it, like I said earlier. Now it's Jurassic World. But now the park is open and it's like, ooh, that's kind of cool. And then the dinosaurs get loose. I mean, we've been waiting to see that since the first film. I'm not crazy about Jurassic World, you know, and it's mainly because of the characters. Like, I think Chris Pratt, I don't like him in the film.
In everything.
And, you know, and then they do Fallen Kingdom, Jurassic World 2. And now the third film was supposed to come out. I don't know if it's this year, next year. And it's like, okay, like, stop beating a dead horse. Right. But I feel like 2 was such a missed opportunity. It could have been really great. So, but yeah, I mean, we could go on forever about these,
there are hits
sequels.
and misses.
There's always hits. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love Aliens.
Aliens is great. Again, Alien introduced a concept that was pretty basic but big for the time.
Right.
And then 2, it's like, okay, we're gonna just, now it's Alien 2.0.
Right.
So that's cool.
James Cameron at the helm of that. So he did 2 pretty good jobs between Terminator and Aliens.
And then lastly, I want to mention one of my favorite sequels is Scream 2. I think that's an excellent film because we now take the character from the first film who had this trauma to her, and the whole film, it was like a soap opera horror film because we're focusing on characters. Wes Craven got really well-known actors. Mm-hmm. Everyone knew, you know, Courtney Cox and Neve Campbell. She was on Party of Five.
Matthew Lillard.
Right, really well-known actors, but they made the lead character played by Neve Campbell. They made her an interesting character, and then we now explore that in the second film and even further in the third film. And that to me is good writing.
Yes.
And who would think for like a slasher movie we're going to care about characters? So,
cool.
You know, yeah. So that's it. I mean,
excellent. So
go on forever.
Some of our selections.
Just some
we didn't like so much.
If we mentioned a movie you had, that struck your fancy, let us know.
Programs at cshlibrary.org. I will plug that again.
Yes. And next time we're going to be talking about movie remakes.
Yes.
And what is a remake? You know, and all of that. That's a whole controversial topic.
A good remake
versus a bad one. We'll definitely revisit the Psycho remake and that.
Okay.
I definitely want to talk about that.
Now I got the wheels turning. Excellent.
All right. So thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.